Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the BlkWmnAnimator, coming to you with another video. And in this video, I have Erik Chichester. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Can you give us a little intro about yourself?
All right. I will start by saying I'm a Black animator, family man. I'm a cartoonist. That's part of my soul, and I'll talk about that a little later. Been came from New York, and now living on the West Coast, Seattle area. So in games. So there you
Fan freaking tastic.
go.
So, where specifically are you from, and how was it growing up? What is your origin story?
All right. I'm actually from New York, Long Island, New York, Hempstead, Long Island. Uh, one, once named one of the worst school districts in New York State. True story. I was a product when I was little. I was in foster care, and I was adopted by my grandmother and my sister and brother. We all were adopted by my grandmother, who raised us. She was in her late 80s, and she was such a performer and show person. She has a whole backstory where she was in the music industry from back in the 50s, and her husband was a writer. So growing up with that influence, she raised us from when we were little. And when I was a kid, growing up, because at the time there was like the crack cocaine era. So when I was growing up, I saw a lot of that in my community. But I never was raised, knew my mother or my father that well. I met my father, and he was around. He was in the military, but because of the experiences he had a drink. He drank a lot, and so it took him away from the family a lot, and he had a lot of trauma that he had to deal with. So, but the one thing that when I was a little, I remember being in kindergarten, and I had this teacher, Miss Goki. And she once showed us how to draw snow people. And I've never seen it. When I to this day remember her standing at the board doing this. And she was telling the story about the three billy goats gruff. And she was drawing the billy goats as people, but they were snowmen. And I could not stop doing it. It was like when she started showing me that, I was just drawing snow people all over the place. And she's like, oh, you're so good. And just like any story, a teacher give you affirmation and leads you down a path. So when I was I remember I would wake up. I remember clearly to this day. We would wake up and you have nap time. And so when I would wake up early, she would let me go to the table and sit there and draw. And she got away my grandmother, and she's like, this little boy really likes drawing. And so my grandma was like, oh yeah. So she would let me come home with some paper and extra paper and pencils and stuff. So I would draw and color and have some fun with that. And so my grandmother, when I was little, she would always tell me, hey, artists don't get famous until they die. So you're going to be a doctor. So like for all my life, I was told, like when I was little, she was like, you're going to be a doctor. You're not going to be no artist, nothing, because I wouldn't stop. When I was a kid, I just kept drawing and drawing and drawing, and my teachers kept telling my grandmother, like, "Hey, this kid really likes this," And my grandma was like, "No, he's going to be a doctor," So, to make a short story, long story short, like what got me into professional art was I was in middle school, and they had a contest for. It was like right at the end of like early 90s and like late 80s, and they had this contest about like don't do drugs, right? Because crack was a big thing, and in New York, yeah, it was like a big deal. And so they had this contest for the newspaper, and they were like, whoever comes up with an illustration will get like, I think it was like they sent you to Pizza Hut or something like that, and they give you some money, like $50. So all my life when I was a kid, all the other kids in class could draw like Transformers and Voltron and all this stuff, and I couldn't draw that stuff, and I was always just drawing my own thing. And so I didn't care about I knew I couldn't do what they were doing, so I just did what I could do. And so in my story, in my drawing that I made a kid drawing someone doing like a graffiti billboard, of don't do drugs. But I had a hand in there of a kid drawing that. And I won the contest. So out of all the school districts in all Long Island, I won. And so the newspaper came by and they had this whole deal. And so the lady at the newspaper was like, you're pretty good at this. Would you like to draw for the newspaper periodically? Because they had Newsday is the newspaper in New York and Long Island. And so she's like, we have a kids section. And every week we publish kids' drawings. And I was like, I'll do it. So I was a young kid. And so I took on that job. And up until I left high school, I was just drawing illustrations for the kids section of the newspaper. And my heart was set, and I wanted to be Charles Schultz, and make comic strips. And I got into that world, and my grandmother, she kept taking me to the store to buy art supplies. And so at the time we didn't have a lot of money, so we would go to garage sales in New York. And at the time, you had a lot of like architects who lived there. So my grandma would buy me the equipment that those architects had that they were selling in the garage sale. So I had all this like trying to be Mr. Artist and stuff like that. She's like, oh, remember, this is just a hobby. Like kids play basketball. You're gonna be a doctor. So I was like, okay, grandma. And so we didn't have a lot of money. So with the blessing I had with having that job, they started to pay me. And I remember I still have the first book I bought right here in the shelf. That's why I have the books behind me. It's nickel point about books. I wanted to be Charles Schultz, and so I did these drawings. And my grandma, she was older, and so by having that job, it actually helped me pay for lunch for me and my brothers and sisters. So when we got to school, I got like every time I did a drawing, I would get like $100. So that money went to us getting lunch. So soon after, I had another teacher, Miss Linda Gregg in high school, and she saw what I was doing, and she's like, yeah, we had some artists come through this school before, and they're going off to work at Disney. And so she gave me this booklet, and it was about making a career as an animator. And it was like early 90s. So I was looking through it, and I was still doing my comic strips. And so what she would do is post my comic strips on they had this billboard at school where they post all the artwork that you did. And so the students, I was known for doing that. So the students would come by and they always wanted to see what my new comic strip was going to be. And I did this whole series based off me and my twin sister and then our friends. And yeah. Oh, you're twins as well? There you go. So yeah, it was really fun and a lot of fun. Like really funny strips. I made like really goofy jokes as a kid. So I sent my work into the syndicates, King Feature, and someone wrote me back. They were like, you're a really talented young man, but you need to have more life experience. And so when you do that, you come back and we'll publish your stuff. We'll think about publishing your stuff. And I was so happy to see that. Right. And so it just motivated me as I went through. So back to the story about my teacher. She gave me this booklet. And so coming from the hood, you're like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? I could say and make nails, or do something like that, or, And so I saw it in this booklet. An animator was working for The Simpsons, and they were making like $100,000, and I showed it. And I remember to this day, my grandma was making chili, and she was on that pot, and I was just like, man, I gotta go tell my grandma I want to be a doctor. And I was 14 years old, and I just walked up to her, and I was like, hey, grandma. This booklet says you can make a lot of money being an animator. And so she looked at it, and I could see her face change. And she took a moment to breathe, and she's like, you know what? I will support you in whatever you want to do. And from then on, my grandma was my biggest, I'll say patron, of everything I did. She would always, help me go get the materials I needed. She would always encourage me. I'd be up late, and at the time, remember smooth jazz was a thing, and that was like the only station you could get at night. Yeah. So I didn't want to play any music too loud because hip hop, would only come on Saturdays. So like I didn't want to play music too loud. So my grandmother was in the room next door, and I would play the music really low because had another job that would work through high school to help my family get by. So I had like literally 3 jobs in high school, and so I would play this music really low. I remember to this day, my grandmother. I'd be coming home from work, and she'd come in and she'd give me, she'd take a look at my work and give me the nicest encouragement. Because I would sit there and do my drawings, and God rest her soul. I miss her because she was integral in who I am today. She pushed me where I am, and I would not be where I am without her love and support. Um, so moving after that, I took my money that we had, and in Hempstead, Long Island, there was like a movie theater where all the movies that had been out for like a year would show. So, so this movie,
used to go to the dollar movie.
right, the dollar movies, right? So we get in for like $3, and so my sisters and brothers, and so we went to see Beauty and the Beast. That hat came out, and I was like, all right, I take my sisters. I got some money. I'm doing it now. I'm in high school. I'm making cash doing this, and I wasn't making that much, but my sisters and brothers went with me everywhere I went. So I sat down and I watched this movie, Beauty and the Beast, and it changed my life. When I saw that film, it literally changed the direction of what I wanted to do. I was like, I know I want to be an animator now. When I saw that, I would say Little Mermaid had some influences on that as well. Because my aunt, she loved that film, and she would play it over and over again. She had the VHS, and she would play it over. And I'll tell you a story. There's an animator, Dan Haskett, and I'll tell you why. I know why she liked it, because she could see in that character some African American traits. And I'll let you know more about that later when I talk about this great animator, Dan Haskett. He's a good friend of mine. So all those influences helped me. And so when I got into college, I went to Pratt and New York, Pratt Institute, and they were like, this is before they had animation programs at all. Right. They had animation equipment, but no program. So I was the first one. So I was like, yeah, I want to be an animator. And they were like, you're going to be a film major. And I was like, all right, but we'll give you like illustration and animation classes along the way. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, so they made this program for me when I was there. So I had film major I had to do, but at the same time, all of my electives were in art illustration and art education. So when I got there, I was always in this world of cartooning, and I never knew about like figure drawing. Like that was not something that was in my I did not know anything that people took off their clothes and you drew them. I did not know that, that's like that. So, but it was a total shock. And so they had me sit in this class when I first went to Pratt. My sister went with me. It was snowy. I remember that day. And we got there, and we were like, I was like in like 11th grade. And so I was testing out different schools, and then the professor, my sister in the back, we were giggling the whole time. I was like, oh man, this is dude naked. And so the professor said, oh, you guys are having a good time. So he took my desk and put it right under the dude. So I was like standing there, and the guy's like right here in front of me. And it was a good lesson, but I'll come back to that. Come back to that about being taking it seriously, right? Yeah. So as we get into school, I did my first year, and I did the film courses. And so I finally got to the point where I could take a figure drawing class. And so when I got there, the teacher was like, everybody take this big paper and draw your hand. So I drew my hand the way I knew how to draw stuff like cartoons, right? So and she came over, and she was like, and I looked around the room, everybody had this formal training. Like they were like these, like, they've been to like, these art academies before they got to college, And so she was like, she came up to me and she put her hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget this. And she's like, we're going to have to work with you. Don't worry. And in that moment, when she said that, when I grew up, I knew the importance of me succeeding, because I had to for my family. I had to succeed to help my family along the way. And I believe in divine intervention, because sometimes I don't preach, religion or anything, but I go to church regularly, and I believe that God has led me to certain things for a certain reason.
Right.
And so when I saw that, I stopped for a moment. I took a beat, took a breath, and I looked around the room and I saw what other people were doing. I turned the page over, this huge paper. And from then, I took a look at my hand and I actually drew my hand the way it was. And she came over, then the teacher came back to me and she was like, were you just BSing me? Were you lying? And I was like, no, ma'am, I wasn't. And so from then, I never had been exposed to anything like this before. And so it was like an explosion of art. So I just kept drawing and drawing all this stuff. Like it was stuff I never had been introduced to before. And this lady was so angry at me, the whole class, because she thought that I was like lying to her because my drawing was so cartoony, and she thought I was being like a smart ass or something.
Right.
And it came to a point where at the end of the class, they would have these reviews, and I drew so much, and I was taking sticks and drawing stuff with ink and all this stuff I've never done before. I was like, dude, this is so cool. And like, so I put my work up for critique, and to this day, I never forget. My friend was standing next to me, and I thought this lady, because she hated me. This lady actually, every time I cut a class, she was not happy with me. And so she would give this long critique to all the other artists. I put my stuff up, and she just stood there, and she didn't say nothing. She said, oh, just take it down. And all the students just walked around. They were looking at everything I did, and she was like, just take it down. And I was like, okay. And so I left that class with an A, because she was like, but what she didn't know is that where I grew up and how I grew up, I was not exposed to the things that a lot of the richer students, I'll say, were exposed to. I grew up very poor, on food stamps and, you know, and welfare. My grandmother, you know, because we're in foster care, and so that was my experience. So after that, that what went through my head in that whole time was like, I have to make it not for me. I have to make it because I knew I had a little brother and a sister that I had to help my grandma support. My grandma was hitting around. She took us in when she was in her 80s. And I was always thinking, like, oh man, so my grandma, 20 years, I need to be there to be able to help support my family. So everything I did was in that, with that mindset, like be able to help my grandmother raise my sisters and brothers. So as I left there, later on Disney, I remember we had this big snowstorm, and they came by and they were looking at our work, and they were like, oh yeah, kid, we're gonna be looking at you. This is when they were recruiting, like during like the mid 90s. It was like, oh man, they were doing like going to every college and trying to get kids, and they were like, you're really talented, but we're gonna definitely be looking at you. And to have Warner Brothers and everybody say they like my work, but they would always say your presentation needs work, because I didn't know how to make a portfolio. So what I did is took all my work and I stapled it all together. It's so ignorant. But I didn't know. I did not know until I got to college. Like all these kids had these like portfolio cases, and I was like, I can't afford that. I couldn't afford a portfolio case at all. And I just had whatever I got from high school. So my teacher, again, your teachers are important. She would give me paints and equipment to help me, because she actually lived near the high school. So she would come home and give me some of the equipment from the high school so I could actually use for school. And that's another story within itself. And also, I'll take a step back and tell you about the power of being kind and being blessed at the same time. When I went to school, Pratt, I had got a lot of scholarships and everything was great, but I did not have enough money to go to the school. And I was told that because of my financial situation growing up in foster care, that there was this program called HEOP, where in New York, they help you go to school and they pay for it. So I went to the finance department, and I was like, yeah, my counselor was telling me that I could do this, and this is what would help me get to college. And so when I got there, the lady took a look at my background, and she saw my grades. She's like, unfortunately, we cannot give you HEOP because your grades in high school were too high. And I was like, what? Was like, excuse me now? So I was counting on this because all the people were telling me this is what I was going to get. And she was like, no, your grades in high school are just too high, and this is for people who were struggling in school, but also have financial struggles. But she's like, unfortunately, maybe you go down to the bursar's office and maybe you can talk to them and see what happens. And I tell you, this walk that I took from where she was like right across the campus. It was like the longest walk I've ever taken in my life. And I was like, man, there was no, this was not a situation where it was like, oh, I have somewhere else to go back to. It was, I had to make this happen.
Yeah.
So I walked into that bursar's office, it was packed with parents, all these rich people who can afford to pay out of their pocket. And so the lady at the front desk, she was helping all the people out. And she was pissed off. Like she was just having this argument with this, I'll never forget it. This girl, she had like green hair and they were just going back and forth. And I'm like, I'm finished. I'm like, this, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm out, you know what I mean? This is it for me. So like, and I was next. So, and she was just arguing with this girl. And so I walked up and my grandma, you know, the way she raised me is to be respectful. And this black lady, I forgot her name was Stephanie, I believe. And she was there and she was so mad. And so I just walked up to her and said, ma'am, good afternoon. I was just speaking to the people over there and they were telling me about school and my grades were too high. And I'm just looking for a way to stay in school. Is there anything you can do to possibly help me? I'd be very grateful. Thank you so much for any help you can give me. Paraphrasing some stuff, but I was very, trying to be as polite as possible. And the lady, she just stopped and she looked at me like with this hard look. And then she grabbed my paper from my hand, and it was like the bulletproof glass, and she grabbed it, and she came out from around the bin, and all the parents were sitting in there, and she came out the door, and she goes, "This is the only person all day long who's treated me with the respect that is due. All day long, I'm getting yelled at and screamed at by you parents, and blah 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 blah." And she was the head of like the bursar's office, and she was just going off on the parents. It's just like, when we're in this office, we're being respectful and we're treating people with respect. And she was like, this is the only person that ever done it. She walked back into the closet. I had a $12,000. I owed the school $12,000. She went back and she changed it, and I got it back. It was $500. And she was like, now take this, go get your finance, go get your work study job and pay the rest of the $500 off. And she gave me all these grants and everything just so I can go to school. And she looked out for me from then on. And and so to this day, I thank her because I would not be in school. I could not have gone to school without her grace and God's grace and her kindness. So being kind to people sometimes who are going through a hard time,
Right.
You never know what you might get. Even if you don't get anything out of it, just be kind to people. Because it matters. So anyway, I'll move on.
Yeah. Well, really quickly, I think it was last year in April.
Sure.
My battery went out in my car, and I called AAA, and I had the guy replace my battery.
Yeah.
And while he was working, he just was like, because I'm in the valley in Charlotte Oaks.
Yeah.
He just was like, "Thank you for being nice to me." I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Because I guess all these people out here just like they'll have car issues and act like it's his fault that they have car issues.
Yes, exactly.
And I just was like, because in the interaction, I was actually saying I was internally thanking him for being nice.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But he was like, "Thank you for like being nice," and I just was like, What have you been through to thank me for what I'm doing?
Yeah, and you would be amazed how many people just need to hear some acknowledgement, and just to know that, you don't take them for granted. Yes. And a kind word to somebody will go a long way. And
even if what I do with my YouTube channel, some people reaching out to me.
Yeah.
Or like I'll be in these animation groups online, And people really don't be saying thank you.
Yeah.
You built up, like, I looked up this information and gave it to you, and they were like, all right.
Right.
I'm like, dang, you can't even say
Right.
thank you.
Just be polite and say thank you. You know, I don't know what happened, like, because I remember if I didn't say thank you when I was a kid, man, you ever felt like you got these eyeballs on the back of your neck and just like, it's like, and you turn around and you can see in the reflection, your grandmother just staring at you, like, like that's what not saying thank you was for me. It's like, so my grandma, like, man, or just being nice to people and having some empathy and like, you know, and you have the moments in life. Like I remember when I was a kid, and I was in middle school, and we were walking home, and where I grew up, again, in a lot of it was very poor area, and I saw this homeless man we passed him every day, but for this one day, I don't know what it was about this one day, and I just passed by him, and I couldn't stop crying when I saw him, and I was 12 years old, and I think we were in middle school, so we used to go to like these hostess places, like, you know, we could buy, remember the hostess cakes and stuff like that. So we all went to the hostess and we bought a whole bunch of stuff. And I got my sisters and brothers and my friends and said, hey, let's get this man something to eat. And every day we walked past him, we would go to hostess. We never forgot him. We would always buy him something, and until we didn't see him anymore. And I believe that sometimes in life, there are certain things that happen to you in life that make you who you are, and if you pass by it, just like you said, talking to this guy and saying to him thank you, you don't know where he's going to take that in life, where he'll go home and you know, had a hard day, and his wife had a hard day or something, and she can say, hey, you know what, let me pick that up for you, you know, let me do this for you, because he had someone say thank you to him. He can now pass that on to people without even knowing why he's done it. And so it makes you who you are, right? And like, so as we move on, I was in college, and then I'll tell another story. And I had a friend come to me, and I was an RA, you know, because I got a job doing that, and resident advisor. And so a friend of mine came to me, he's like, you know, I was supposed to go to DreamWorks. I mean Disney. That's my heart set, Disney. And so a friend told me, he's like, this company DreamWorks is going to be here. You should check them out. And I was like, what's a DreamWorks? I don't know. He's like, yeah, I think it's owned by like Steven Spielberg or something. And he was like, I was like, oh, really? So I was like, I'll just submit my stuff to them so I can find out what I'm doing wrong. So when Disney comes, I can like fix it. Because prior to that, we were told, we had that group that I told you about, there was Snowstorm. They were like, hey, if you guys should work together, you know, I had a group of friends, and they were like, we should work together to try to like build a, you know, a nice, you know, animation piece. And so when we came out of it, I was like, yeah, you know, let's go work together. Let's make this happen. You're good at layout. You're good at this. You're good at that. We can just make something. At the time, all my friends were like, nah, man, this is a competition. We all trying to do it ourselves. You know, we you know, you gotta make it happen. And I'm like, the person just said, we got to work together to make this happen. And they were like, nah, man, we're competing against each other. And I was like, and I'll come back to that and why that is toxic for artists, that mentality. So I kept moving forward. I kept trying to work with them. They were friends of mine. But when DreamWorks came along, I didn't have a portfolio. I couldn't afford it. So my friend let me borrow one of my friends who was in that, let me borrow his old one. It was all beat up, and like this big portfolio was like all ripped up and stuff. So I just put all my stuff in there, made it look as neat as possible. And so I was in my junior year in college. And so I submitted that portfolio to them, and they had this long list of people. You know, that list, you had to come back and check to see if you made it. And so I was at the bottom of the list. And so they're like, yeah, we want to check you out. So I came up to my interview, and I stood there, and they were like, is Erik Chichester here? Erik Chichester. I'm sitting there like, and then I'm like, Erik Chichester is here. So they assumed I was going to be white because my name was Erik Chichester. So the guy was like, and he said that to me. He jokingly said, he's like, you know, and so when I came back and sat down in front of them, they just stared at me for a while. And I just stared back at him. I was like, oh no, what I do? So I was like, and they just stared at me for like, it was like this silence. And I was just staring at them, and they're like, you know, the guy, and he was the nicest guy. He was like, he's like, you know, young man, this is the worst portfolio I've ever seen. He said, I've never seen a portfolio look like this before. He said, and he started looking at it, he said, look how beat up this is. He said, this is the worst portfolio. And he's like, but he said, when you open it, you see all this beauty. You kept going through all my stuff. And it's like, this is one of the most beautiful portfolios I've seen. But the presentation, he said, you never know what you're going to get. He said, I learned that lesson in life. And he kept telling me that. And the lady was sitting there and she was smiling. And she was like, we're going to keep our eye on you. He's like, you're going to keep our eye on you. I said, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, you know, because I couldn't afford to do these things, but I was able to present my work to the people. And I appreciate my friend allowing me to do that and have that moment. And then I didn't think anything of it. And so I got a call back from the person head of recruiting at the school. And she was like, you know, DreamWorks called about you and they want to offer you a mentorship for the summer. And I was like, say what now? So I was hell bent on going to the Disney internship because that was the big deal. And she's like, no, they're going to fly you out and put you up in a college and put you up for a summer. I was like, what? And so I went back and I told my grandmother, and she was like, oh yeah, you know, you go work for that Spielberg, go do that. And I was like, sure. So
older people, they latch onto them names.
Sure do.
Be like, yeah.
They sure do, right? So she knew who Spielberg was. And she's like, you know, that Disney is nice, but she's like, that's Spielberg, you go work for him. And I was like, all right, you know. So I took my grandma, I took the internship, and they brought me out for the summer, and they gave me all this like great training. I worked with Duncan Majorbanks. He was the animator on the supervising for the Sebastian the Crab. Man, he's the coolest dude. And I tell you, like just the coolest, one of the coolest people you ever met. And like he's just so laid back and just so cool. So like he gave me my initial training, and at the time they were working on Prince of Egypt and El Dorado was beginning, and they were starting with Shrek. And boy, it was such a blessing to be able to do that and go out there and learn. And so he's the one who actually told me about Van Haskell. Like he said to me, he's like, you know, like he has this very slow cadence and very deliberate baritone voice, and he's like, this is animator. He's one of the greatest artists, you know. He's like, you know, and he's like, boy, they, you know, industry didn't really treat him well. He's like, you know, and he kept telling me, he's like, and he would give me these little bits of advice about Dan. It's like, yeah, he was like, you know, he deserves more credit than what he was giving me. He's just a great guy, you know, and just such a great artist. And kept praising Dan, and I was like, I gotta meet this Dan one day. So and he gave me another bit of advice. He's like, you know, a lot of young artists come into the game. He's like, they want to climb the ladder really fast. And he's like, don't do that. He said, what happens is that you build a career with animation. He's like, what happens is that you're seeing the here and now. He's like, this right now is the most important thing to you. He said, this is not. He said, what happens to you 20 years from now is the most important thing for you, because you want to build a career over time. And he just imparted me with so much knowledge and wisdom. So to this day, Duncan, hats off to you, man. You're the greatest. And thank you so much for everything. Just want to let him know. And so my internship was over, and at the time my first job was on a show. I was interning at, I went back to school and I interned at, from I think sophomore year up until like my senior year, I was at MTV. And so this is before DreamWorks, and you know, and so I was there, and I was on a show called Daria. I don't know if you remember that. It was a spin-off of like Beavis and Butthead. And so I would go in every Friday, and you know, you go into MTV networks, and you know, it was a big deal back then. So I didn't have any money. When you're a college student, you have no money, so I would go in my you know, ratty jacket or whatever I had, you know, to get by. There's some of the most talented people there because they had such a breadth of knowledge about what they were doing. And I got to work on that show, and I got the job, the internship, because at the time I was trying to impress a girl. So we were we were all into, that '90s era where it was like, oh yeah, you got to do something with your life, blah 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 blah. Be
Yeah.
happy, you're black, black man, black trying to make it in this world. So we were out internship hunting. So my professor had taken our class to NTV, and and so I'm like, I'm gonna go back up in there and get me an internship. And she was with me, and so I just like, you know what? I'm just gonna walk right over here and then see what happens. So I walked up to the security guard, and he was a brother. I was like, yo, man. I said, sorry, I was trying to, see if I can go upstairs and talk to NTV, see if I get an internship. And he looked at me. He was like, 51st floor. It was like, here's your pass. So I was like, thank you. So I'm like, oh man, I'm on this train. Can't stop now. She's with me. So I don't think I'm looking stupid. So I just walked up in there. I was like, I went in, and I talked to the people in the front, and I was like, and I remember the lady who showed us around. So I told him, I said, can I speak to this lady who showed us around? And I remember her name. And so they were like, they went and got her. And she came back out. She was like, I was like, yes, ma'am, I'm just hoping I can apply for an internship here. And I was in this class, and I was really inspired by what I saw, blah, blah, blah. She's like, yes, come back with your portfolio on this date, and I'll review it. I did, and they gave me an internship. So, which is great. So I will say that show was so cool because I got to see the process of making a television show from beginning to end. And they also gave me some, while I was there, they let me do prop design. So it was me and this guy, Dave Trexler. If you look at the credits, we were doing like the props, all the books, all the, the cups and everything. They let us draw all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, you're really good at this. You're really talented. So we want to give you an opportunity to do character design. And so I was like, oh yeah, let's do it, And so they gave me a character, and I I didn't really know what I was doing. So I did my best, and I did the turnaround and try to match what they had. And so one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, in my career, happened here. Art director, she came over to me and she pulled me in, and she's like, you, come here into my office. She was the art director of the show. And she's like, this is the worst turnaround I've ever seen. She did all her red lines on it. It's like, this is horrible. And she was like, this is what you do. Don't you know how to draw? And I was like, just like, I see you doing it all the time. And I was just sitting there like, oh man. And so she just went in on me. And she's like, all right, go ahead and redo it. And so I did. And I did it better. And she kept pushing me to do better. And I believe that was one of the most pivotal moments in my life where I understood to seek knowledge and also take it very, very seriously, because what you do affects other people.
Right.
And when someone gives you an opportunity, you don't want to squander it or not take it, or you want to put your best foot forward and be honest and say, I don't know how to do this. Can you please help me? And that was my mistake, rather than me just being, just thinking in my head I could do something. Rather, I was too afraid to say, can you help me? Yeah. And I should have done that. And I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me as an artist. It not only humbles you, but it also makes you realize you don't know everything, and that's okay. Yeah. You can find somebody who can help you and help you grow as an artist. So moving forward after that, graduated, and on Christmas Day, Christmas Day, 98, around that time, right? I think it was 98, 97. I got a call, and DreamWorks formally hired me. And they called me on Christmas Day to tell my grandma. And my grandma was so happy and proud of me, and my aunt, they raised me. I remember that day fairly well, and I felt like, all the sacrifice my grandma made for me and my aunt, it paid off for them, because they were older and they grew up in a different generation. My grandma was in her early 90s, so she's seen a lot of hurt and pain in her life, and my aunt as well. And she grew up through the Jim Crow era down in the South, and so for her to see that was a true blessing, and I'm grateful that I was able to experience that with her. And so from then on, Went out to DreamWorks, worked on a couple of their films. I think it was El Dorado was the one I was scheduled on, and I was a rough animator. They brought me in as a rough animator into the animation department. And my mentor at the time was animator, one of the greatest animators to live, Franz Vision. He animated, he was supervising for, I believe, Castle Dance, the little girl, and that boy. And I remember meeting him for the first time, and he was a jokester, but he turned around and he had all these glasses on. It was like this like machine, and he just turned around, hello, and he had glasses upon glasses, and he just turned to me and he was like, and so I was like, wow. So working with him, it was so cool. Like, and I learned so much from him. And the first assignment he gave me, he was like, make these photocopies for me. And so I was like, yes, sir. So I went over, made the photocopies, and I was going through them. I was looking at his scene that he did. He was animating the chief. I believe he was the supervising animator for that. And I brought him back and ordered him the way he asked me to. He was like, first test you pass. He's like, I always do that to find out if someone is going to be humble enough to be able to, I can talk with them and ask them to do the simplest steps. And he was like, great job. And so from then on, he would show me little tricks and stuff. And so as I moved in there, I'll tell you another story. The first day I was there, I went to use, I was standing, I went to use the bathroom, and I was standing there, and this guy, while I'm standing there, came up to me and was like, how'd you get this job? Who hired you? Where'd you come from? And I was like, I'm standing there like, so I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. He just gave it to me. He's like, I've been working for this job for such a long time. He was just like so angry. And I was just like, man, you need to calm down before I pee on you. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? So I'm like, so he just kept going on and on and on. And I'm just like, all right, man, I don't even know who you are. I'm a New Yorker. So I'm like, the first time, I'm like, yo, man, we can settle this one way or the other. So I'm just joking, but like I'm being polite. So I finished up, and then as I'm coming out, one of the James Baxter, he came out. He's like, I think he heard it. And he was like, don't worry about people who do that to you.
Yeah.
And he told me, he's like, you got this job because you were the best at it. He said, that's the reason why you got it. He said, don't listen to people who say that. He said, they're in their own world. And from then on, I just met some of the nicest people you could ever meet in animation. I even got to work with him on the Tulio. And it was like, man, like working with James Baxter and all these great artists. When you're young, you're like, you see them in books and idolize them, and you're like, oh man, he's just like, can I even speak to these people? You know what I mean? Like, can I sharpen your pencil or something? You know what I mean? Like, and you get to see, but the kindness that they had for everyone was infectious. And there were some people there who took animation as if it was like, you're now LeBron, or something like that, and but these guys were humble and because I think they saw more in life. They knew the ups and downs of the industry, so they didn't get caught up in the whole like, I'm better than you and you got to kiss my behind BS that people do. These are some great artists, and I learned a lot. An animator, Gary Perkovic, he showed me how to do take reference and animate reference. So there's a scene where in the movie where Jekyll Khan kicks one of the soldiers into the pit. I actually did the reference for that scene because he had me actually act it out, and he taped me, and I was like, oh, I know you do that. Like, you guys take reference. I thought they were making it all out of their head. So that was when we first started, I was like, I thought that's how good you had to be, just get all this out of your head. But no, he taught me all these different, you're exposed to all these different animators. So I was roughing between it for different artists, and then we moved on to the film Spirit. And there was a lot of training for that. And then the studio had went through a transition phase where they stopped production. And so because I think I was the last trainee for them that they ever had. It was late 90s. So they were like, we're moving on, we have to rework the film. And So they lay people off. So it was my first foray into layoffs. And I remember Kassenberg saying this is a business as well. But when you got there, they got you had all the ice cream and they fed all of LA, all this stuff. But actually I'm going to come back to this, but hearing him say that, it's actually important for artists to understand. And a lot of artists don't understand that there's a separation between the business and the love of animation and art. And we have to navigate both as artists. And to be able to do that and not get hurt and not get disappointed, it's a hard thing to do. And
number one, I know your takeaway from that, the turnaround thing was like to ask for help. But my takeaway was like, you take criticism very well. Several stories where like people like bashed you, and you just be like, oh, let me just turn around the paper and like try. And I feel like sometimes with interacting with my peers and like younger people sometimes do not take the criticism very well.
Yeah, it's I think it's also part of too growing up with my grandma, black woman, a black woman who grew up had very strong opinions and didn't take no mess. Chopped off. She caught her husband cheating on her. She chopped off his feet with a rusty axe. And then the judge said, "It's okay," and laughed at it and said, "Go ahead and go." My grandma didn't play, so she was brutally honest about things.
I feel like. Because there's a lot of there's like a lot of like dating discourse that happens on social media, and people constantly talk about the grandmothers like that stayed for 50 years. But I'm like and like it's tangential, like the grandmothers that stayed for like 50 years, but also like sometimes with the granddad, but like with the grandma that stayed for 50 years, but like sometimes the grandma possibly killed their husband.
Well, yeah. And it's true because there's, it's not what we see on everything. Is not what we see on TV about the 50s, and the whole, But I mean, just to get back to the criticism part, is like I grew up learning. My grandma used to tell me, and I apologize. I'm gonna say this, and it's hardcore, but she told me this. I got a job working at this place called Feldersfield, and my job was to scoop duty from the dogs. My first thing you got in, I had to do that. And my grandma pulled me to the side and she said, "You know what? If you're gonna scoop shit, be the best shit shoveler there is." And so, and then she starts laughing, and so I started laughing. And so she taught me early on that, and I also learned too, is that when I was coming up, criticism to me in animation wasn't criticism. It was introducing me to something I never knew before.
Right.
And I see criticism that way to this day. It's never, for every artist, don't take anything as criticism. Take it as you're learning, and you're stepping into a new environment, and you're trying to actually understand it, because you're going to get better at it. The more you do something, you're gonna get better and better. So don't ever see it as criticism. Just see it as you're constantly in college, and also too, curiosity, And also for me is that I had no way back. So I couldn't. So when someone criticized me, I took it because I knew that I had to get better so I can help my family. And I will come back to this because sometimes God puts something in your ear early on, so that way your future is affected by it.
So like the other takeaway that I had was the Disney versus DreamWorks. Like I learned in my life that sometimes when you have like a purpose or a goal, it's best to not be too specific with it. Like for example, like I want to be in the animation industry versus I want to work at Disney. And so because luckily you were like, I'm gonna use DreamWorks as a test. So it actually worked out. But sometimes we get so stuck, particularly when we grow up with animation and like kind of put it on this pedestal. We get so stuck in like, I want to work for this place.
Yes.
But you just have to say, I want to work.
Right.
Like for me, I started my career in Korea working on like Family Guy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times we are like, oh, we want to get our name in the credits, but after I got my name in the credits with the first job, so now for the rest of my career, just pay me.
Right, exactly. But that also comes with experience and getting, you know, as you get older, you're like, oh man, like, okay, I'm starting to understand, you know, the value of not feeling like, and I'll come back to this. Like, this is one thing I learned: the money you get at DreamWorks and Disney, you can make it somewhere else. The food you put on your table from the paycheck you get, it's going to be the same you get from the paycheck you get from Disney and DreamWorks. Only thing is, you're at a bigger name, right? And a well-established name. And so, yes, it's great to work for these big companies. Great to get your start and do that. And people who are doing that are blessed because they're so talented and they're so good at what they do. But I'll tell you, even the greatest artist at Disney and DreamWorks knows that at some point they have to move on and do something else. And they might have to work at a place that's not DreamWorks and Disney, but they're still an animator. They're still an artist, and they still can make a living for themselves and their family. The best animators will tell you that. And I know it in my heart. Any of the greats will let you know. Disney was not the only thing in my life. As we go back through it, so I left DreamWorks and I came back out to New York because my grandmother was getting older, and I thought, okay, I can go back to DreamWorks once they get the film, you know, ready. So I got a job at MTV again, and so from there they were like, you know, we're moving into 3D now, and we're moving, you know, away from the 2D films. And so it was disappointing when I heard that a gentleman named who was head of animation, Christophe Saran, boy, one of the coolest dudes, one of the nice people. He's whole hardcore. But like, he was so kind to me when I was there. And he actually called me up and told me, he's like, hey, you know, we're moving away. He said, why are you there? And TV, he's like, learn as much as you can, because it's like, that's going to inform you as you move down the line, because he knew that the industry was changing. And so, and he was kind enough to actually get on the phone and talk with me and tell me that. And I always wanted to thank him again for that, because it set me up on a path after that. So MTV Animation, it was I think the .com had burst. And so MTV was on their last legs, animation, and they were about to shut down. So we were on their last show. It was called Spy Groove. And so a lot of the animators from Disney Florida and came up to work on this show. And so one day I was sitting there, and remember Dan Haskett, we come back to that. And while I was at DreamWorks, someone had gave me some Dan Haskett drawings. They were in a box. And so I remember hearing this story about people taking his work, because that's what Duncan told me. He said people would take his stuff because he would leave all these drawings around. But like, he does so much. And so people would take his drawings and study them, because he's like, you know, Michelangelo, the Black Michelangelo. So someone had gave me a bunch of his stuff. And so I had original Dan Haskett art. And so we were at, and I never met him. So we were at Spy Groove, and we were on that production, and I was an animator on that. And so one day Dan had came to work on that project. They was like, oh, we're going to get this great artist named Dan Haskett. I was like, I know it. I've heard of him, the legend. I've like heard the legends of him. Is he real? So he was really real. And so, you know how Dan is kind of like, you know, I was like, is he gonna, it's like James Earl Jones of animation, right? Like, when I first, they gave him the special room, and he was like, and he had this like really nice area where he was working, I think, because they wanted to really impress him. And so it's like, so I knew I had these drawings. I brought them in that day, and you ever seen the Wizard of Oz where Dorothy's walking up to the wizard, and you're like, oh shit, what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? So I'm like, is this man gonna be Darth Vader or King Jaffa? You know what I mean? Like that. So I'm just walking, and you know the room just starts to grow as you walk towards somebody, and Dan is just sitting there drawing, and I'm just like, oh, excuse me, sir. And I have him right here to this day. So I walked up to Dan, and he just did this slow turn. This like, yeah, he was very so cool. Just like he's like he's just so cool. He just sits there and turns and just looks at you. I was like, oh, excuse me, sir. I found some of these drawings. I believe these are yours. And so he went through them. He's like, so cool. He started going through each drawing. He's like, yeah, these are mine. Thank you very much, young man. And I was like, no problem, sir. I was like, oh, he's not King Joffrey Joffer or Darth Vader. He's more like Mufasa. You know what I mean? He's like hardcore, but he's still kind and loves you. You know what I mean? So he's a Dan Haskett, he's a Mufasa again. So he'll hear that laugh. But like, so he was so cool to me and so nice and such a great mentor when I was there, and he taught me so much. And to this day, my relationship with Dan is that I will never ask him for any like help, because I see Dan as like he's more like a uncle to me. And when I see his work, and like an inspiration. Like I see it, we sit there and we'll talk about art, but it was always slightly removed from art because I'm talking to him as a Black man.
Right.
And I'm looking at him and his wife, and I'm like, and at the time, my wife, my girlfriend, she was my wife, not my wife, but and I'm like, oh, what kind of life can I have with this woman? Yeah. And I'm looking at Dan and his wife. And one day he invited us over, and his wife, he was working and we were talking, and his wife came over, and she came over and looked at his drawing. She's like, no, I don't know. She was like, I don't know about that. And he looked at her like, he's like, and he started racing, and I was like, that's what you want to know. Mm-hmm. And I was like, because his wife is so kind and she's so supportive of him, but he listens to what she has to say. And he knows that she has a great eye for art, and they respect each other, and they have this loving relationship. And that's what I was looking at Dan for, about being a man, being a Black man, and how you treat people. Because when I grew up, I didn't have a father around. I didn't have, my uncles, or wherever. I didn't have anything. I had my grandmother, my aunt. And I see Dan as a role model for being a good, decent human being. Okay? So Dan, I will never ask him for a job. I will never ask him to put me on. I feel uncomfortable doing that because I don't see him that way. I see him as someone, as an aspiration for who I want to be. Yeah. Right? So I know who I am, and I'm very comfortable who I am, but I still, every young man, every young boy needs someone that they can look up to. Yeah. And that's who I do. That's how I see them.
Then, actually would prefer that more people talk to him.
Right. I know.
He practically begs people to just talk to him. That's the thing about. That's what I think about having this channel and getting the opportunity to meet these people in real life. And Dan is one of my friends as well. Yeah. I just went to lunch with him a few weeks ago. Yeah. And it's because of what you stated earlier, you put these people up on this pedestal that they didn't put themselves on. Exactly. But they're on the ground with us. Exactly. So when we went to the Black History Month event that BlkWmnAnimator put on in February, Dan was there, and Kimson, Albert too.
Kimson,
and Jeremy Rice.
Yeah.
And luckily, some people talk to us, but it's you have Dan Haskett in the room.
Yeah, it's talking to him. But that's what I said. Do you walk up to King Jaffa? I mean, seriously, what are you saying? Should I put some pedals around your feet? Sir? That's the way people. But and that's justified. So he worked hard. To be where he's at, and it's to the skill and level, the skill and talent that he has, and in the environment that he came up in, he deserves all the flowers he can get. Because he fought a fight for us that we didn't see. Right? So he had to take the slings and arrows and also be better than everybody else.
Yeah.
And also sometimes had to take the pain of being hurt by situations that he was put in, and still had to move forward and carry himself in a way that's dignified, right? And he's done it with grace and kindness. And that's what I say. When I talk to Dan, me and Dan get down and we talk. Dan knows. But I talk to Dan for real, for real. Like, but the art part of him, I know people should not be afraid. Don't be afraid of people because they are artists just like you. We're all human beings. And just like I said, when I spoke to the art director there and took the information in, I was not afraid to just go and talk to people and say, hey, can I get some information about this? Or first and foremost, hello, how are you?
Yeah.
How are you doing today? Can I, how's everything going? And then build a relationship with people and let them know that they matter, not just because of what they can give you or what you can get out of them. Let them know they matter because they matter, because they are human beings and that they're a good person.
What you're saying, because something you said earlier kind of made me think of this. Recently, I realized like the way the universe is set up, it is meant for us to be in community. Because, for example, like the different things that you stated, where when you initially did it, it was like, this is the worst thing ever. But then once you got that information from another person, you became better. And I feel like supremacy context is all about individuality. So sometimes when you're in like a tech space, they're like, I was in my room in the darkness for 5 years and learned this. It's like, you could have been in community and learned it in a year.
Well, here's the thing. Black people are raised, like I come from Black church tradition, right?
Yeah.
Community.
Yeah.
Like, I went to church with my aunt and her friends there could slap me across my head when I was cutting up. Community, right?
Yeah.
Like you said about when certain people, like, certain races, like it's almost like this individualism. I did it all myself. It's like African Americans, there are traditional backgrounds, most of us, not everybody, because we're not generalized, but it's steeped in a community that's making you better. A community of people that's growing you as a person. So how you approach that matters. It's like when you see somebody, there's no need to be a shrinking violet and not feel pride in yourself, right? But also don't take advantage of people, right? There's all these different, rules we're taught when you grow up in that tradition, that inform who you are, like you were saying. And so you're right.
And we're so, like I see on social media, we're so anti-rule, anti-tradition, which there's like, of course, sometimes tradition is stifling, but sometimes tradition gives you your foundation. And you mentioned the Black church. Another thing from my takeaway from your when you went to go get your internship with MTV, like, and you can think of this in a secular sense too, but like faith without works is dead. So like, people want things, but they don't do anything to get it.
Right, exactly.
You have to draw in your room. You have to like interact with people. You have to go for what you want. You have to do things. Like even when people ask me, like, "Oh man, like how did you get this person on your channel?" I asked them.
Right.
That's it. Like
exactly.
They responded.
Right. That is the whole thing. If you don't open your mouth, you don't get anything. Right. So you sit there and you can always want. Right. Exactly. And so again, like you go and you pursue these things, like, and you have to, again, the doors of, I've heard no a lot in my life, no matter from when I was a baby to an adult, right? But I can guarantee you, artists, you're going to hear yes sometimes, and it's okay. Accept it, embrace it. Taking a chance sometimes is actually good for you, just saying, but also not just taking a chance and just, but also being genuine and being yourself and being polite. Takes you a long way. Just letting people know, hey, I have a talent and I want to utilize it,
Yeah.
can you help me? It's okay. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
I'll move on. Sorry. So from there, MTV, and it was the .com burst, I think, and so we ended that. And so, boy, I moved on to a show called Little Bill. It was I don't put it on my resume anymore for certain reasons. I can't put that one on, but like, and so that's my foray into preschool animation. I started to learn a lot about preschool animation, and boy, we had some great artists there. And if you ever get a chance to speak to it, one of the most talented artists, black animators, female animators, Jen Oxley. Jen Oxley, Uralis Weeks, Pilar Newton. These are women, Pilar Newton, Jen Oxley, and Uralis Weeks. They are some of the most talented artists you can work with. I got to meet them and work with them on that. Jen Oxley was the director of the show. She only had her own show, Cat versus, I think it was on PBS. I forgot. But she is so good at what she does, and you definitely have to talk to her. Like, I think she's at Scholastic. She's a director over there, and so from there I learned about preschool animation, and I had an epiphany at that point where I was realizing that animation is not just something you do for somebody to make them money. Animation can be something that you can do to actually do some good in this world. And that's what I learned on that show. That these things are impactful for children, and you can influence them at a young age, for good or for bad, right? And so, coming from my community that I grew up in, you know what the bad is, right?
Yeah.
But you can see that you can use your talent and your art to do some good with it. So from there, I think the early 2000s, we had, I called myself, when I came into the industry, the transition generation. And you're probably part of this as well, where we were moving from the traditional way of doing animation to digital space. And a lot of people got hurt by it. A lot of people have fell off because we're moving from hand drawn to this digital world. So the introduction of Photoshop and Cintiqs and all this stuff was just starting. And at the same time, we had the .com burst that happened, and I think those effects came in about 2002. So MTV shut down. A lot of studios. It was very difficult to find work at those times, and so all these smaller studios that were in New York that were doing commercials and had these productions, because at the time, so young people know that there were smaller houses who did those shows. They were outsourcing to the smaller houses, and then the networks would pick those up. Now it's the networks creating the shows, so that's why everybody is so caught up in like, I got to work for Cartoon Network because the network made it. Prior to that, it was smaller houses. You worked for them, and you created a show, and they sold it to those networks. So all that dried up. A lot of those studios shut down. So you had to do a lot of freelancing, and they shut down our production, and so it was right after September 11th, and a lot of that affected that. So the recession that happened because of that. So I'm on my layoff, and this constantly happens to me throughout my life. So prior to that, my sister, she had went through some health issues, and she was pregnant, but I helped her get into a place to stay. And then she finally got a place, and then I got laid off. And I was doing freelance, and I was like, I'm okay. And then I got a knock on the door, NYPD. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was in Brooklyn at the time, and they were like, early 20s. Yeah, I was in my 20s, and they were like, here's your brother. You can't live with your grandmother anymore because she's older and she got hurt, and we cannot not have him there anymore. My brother was 16 years old. And he's like, now he's gonna come live with you. This is what the NYPD told me, and I was like, here you go. So I was like, I have no job. My brother is here. And he's my little brother. I love him to death. But he was a cut up bad, like when he was a kid. So he was a troublemaker. So that's probably why. So I had to go down to social services, and let them know that I would be taking over for my grandmother with him, and let the judge know and all the stuff. And they were like, "All right, good luck to you on your own." So so I was freelancing. He was with me, and so I was trying to keep him in school because he was like, "I don't want to go to school anymore." Blah blah blah. And I was like, "No, you're gonna go to school. You're not gonna be living here with me, and not finish school." So we kept pushing him to do that, and he's a good guy. He lives in he has a nice family, and he works to help raise him. But again, it was tough because I was young and I was like, "Oh man, I'm taking care of a human being." And I'm in my early 20s. I have no job, so I'm like, no full-time job. So this went on for like 2003, 2002, and I was just freelancing. And so I got a call from a show up in Boston, and I don't want to say who it was, but because I'm a paraphrase here because there were good people there, and I know they were trying to do the best. They were like, "Oh yeah, we saw your work, and come on in." And so I went there, and they showed me the show. And I had no job. It was wintertime. I was like, I'm cold. I'm hungry. My brother's hungry. So I took the trip up to New York. I had some money. I'm not gonna lie, but because I was freelancing. So I took the trip up to Massachusetts on the bus, and I went there and I checked out the studio. And the guy was like, "Yeah, we really like your stuff. We really want to hire you on this." And so they showed me the show. And boy, it was going on about calling black women bees and this and that. And like, yeah, this is going to be on BET, blah, 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 blah. And it was on BET, but I don't want to get too crazy into it because I'm not going to try to, it's not their fault that the show went the way it was. They didn't write it. They were just artists there trying to produce it. So it was just going off about black women, this and that. And he's like, "Oh, don't you think this is great? Didn't you think this is great?" And I was just like, and I had to stop. And I have sisters, and I was like, and I thought about that, and I was like, I don't know, my sister's seeing this shit. And I was in my head about it, and I was like, and the guy, excuse my language, I apologize, but I'm New Yorker, I'm salty, can't help. Listening to this guy go on, he's like, and he's trying to convince me that this is a great thing for me to work on. And I understand what he was trying to do because he was trying to recruit me on the project, and he was trying to say, "Oh, well, you relate to this because, and I don't think he was trying to be anyway, kind of like insensitive or anything, but I'm like, I don't want to work on a show that's calling black women bitches and hoes. I'm like, so I tell you, this long ride back, and I was like, man, I have no job. I got my brother, I got raised. And so the guy called me back, he's like, "Yeah, are you interested? We really like you. We'll train you on Flash and we'll teach you how to do that." And I turned it down. I went to church and I heard the sermon about, again, I raised it. Right. I learned about, hey, sometimes in life, you got to make some hard choices, right? Yeah. And I was like, I don't think I want to be a part of something. That's not in my DNA. It's not who I am. And at the time, I was all into trying to do, I was in my era of preschool stuff. I want to do that. But also, too, I just don't want to work on a show that calls women that. That's just not something I want to do. So, because I don't do that. So anyway, and it's wrong. Just be honest. It's not cool. Yeah. So it went on my birthday. February came around, and this way, Uralis Weeks came in because she worked with me prior, and I was doing jury duty, and she called me up. She's like, "Erik, I got this show. We're doing an upfront for." Nickelodeon, where she was at, and she was in creative services at the time. And she was like, "Why don't you come in and help us out with this project?" And it's just like a little freelance gig. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll come in and help out." So I was there with her and a small little team we had there. And we were animating Dora and doing all this stuff for this upfront that they were showing. And then as I was sitting there, I just got this like tall guy just came behind me. It was like I could see his red shirt to this day, and that's all. It's like, and he was like, "Those are really nice drawings. Really nice drawings. Would you like to do some more?" And I was like, "Yes, sir. I have no job." He was like the VP of Nick creative at the time. One of the nicest guys that you can work with, and hit Mr. Hicks. Aaron, sorry, I'm trying to remember. Hicks is his name, and he was like the VP of creative.
Yeah.
So he was like, you could draw some face stuff. So I started drawing face characters. I was doing storyboards for them. And so that took me through the year. And I was just like, oh man, just doing these little freelance. Because at the time, remember, you were working full-time freelance?
Yeah.
You remember those eras? So you didn't get the healthcare or anything like that. But, and so at the end of it, he was like, I really like you. So he's like, why don't you try to, we don't have a job here for animation yet, but we could put you in marketing. And you could do some stuff for like drawing toys and drawing like for like product design. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. So I did it for another year, and I was doing a lot of books with Backyardigans. Remember at the time, and like doing some of the product design stuff. And then the guy never forgot me. He came back and he was like, okay, now we got something open for you here. So we're gonna put you where you belong. That's what he told me. He's like, you belong. So I used to do like on-air animations for Nickelodeon. And I was working with this gentleman called Manny Galan. Boy, he's one of the coolest. Everybody I work with is cool, but one of the nicest guys you ever met. And but he had such a focus on what he was doing, and they did some really creative like ads for like Nickelodeon at the time. So I did that for a good 6 years,
Oh wow!
And so it lasted for a while, and then all of a sudden we had the stock market crash, 2008, and so the company let go of all the people that was in that group, and so I'm back at it again, back on the street. So I'm like, all right, and they still had me doing some freelance because at the time I started doing like shorts for Nick Jr. And there was a short I did called No Mirrors in No Mirrors in Your Nana's House. And then there was like another short I did called Papa Mocha Jungle. So we were doing Black awareness back then, before Black awareness was a thing. So those shorts I did, and that led me to K. Wilson Sterling's and Brown Johnson over at Nick Jr. I think they're at Sesame Street now. They gave me that opportunity because Jen Oxley, another Black animator, comes back to her. She had told them about me, and she's like, yeah, this guy is really good, and you should give him an opportunity. So thanks, Jen Oxley, for that. I appreciate it. And so I directed some shorts, interstitials for them, and then from there, they saw my stuff. And Sesame Street, I was doing that, doing shorts for them as well. And so the stock market crash came along, and then everything kind of dried up again. I was still doing some freelance. I was doing commercial work at the time and doing film credits. And then we get another knock at the phone call, and I had to go down to the police station, and my nephew was there. So my nephew, he was young, born in 2001, and he was always coming over to my house, and he had this he was a young kid at the time, and my sister, as I go back to that, she had some medical issues that hurt her, and I will leave it at that. She wasn't able to raise her child. And so I went to the police station, and they were like, we picked him up. He was stealing food at Target. So he was living in a homeless shelter, and I couldn't find my sister at the time because she had a mental breakdown. She saw her boyfriend shot in the head. So she had a mental breakdown that's still lasting to this day, and a mental illness that's with her. So they're like, you're the only person that we can call that he knew number to call. And I had been looking for them for like 3 months, but I couldn't find them because she had just disappeared. So I was like, remember when that movie, this is going to sound bad, but Curious George came out? I had seen that on my birthday. It came out on my birthday, February 12th. And I saw it, and Amanda, and I teared up because I was like, there's this child, and this man who needs to look after this child because they had no one. And I'm looking at it for the, the nonsense that people say because, it's a monkey, but but I'm talking about the child aspect of that. So when I tell you that God puts things on your heart, there's a reason why things happen. Well, was put on my heart, and I knew in my heart, I kept tugging back and forth. I knew that I would have to take this kid in. It was always in my mindset over the years. So I see the deterioration in my sister. So I took him in. I was like, hey, come on, you with us now? I just got married, and my wife, bless, I'm so grateful to have her because she's been such a partner for me through all these things I had to do. So I took him in, and we raised him. And I'm like, you know what? I got to get a job. So I'm back at it again. I need a full-time job. He needs health care because the foster agency in New York is like, do you work? Do you have this? Freelance don't mean nothing to them. So I'm like, this kid, I'm the only one he knows. So I started sending my stuff out. And I got a call from a game studio. This is in San Francisco. And I hadn't played games. I was like, I'm not a gamer. I couldn't afford it because my grandma couldn't afford to buy us Nintendo. None of that stuff. I just went to my friend's house and watched them. So I got that job, and we went out to San Francisco because the situation he was in was really bad. And I was like, he needs a fresh start. So he was young, and we went out there, and I worked at the game studio, Kabam Games, and I learned, this is when they were doing Facebook games. That was a big thing. So I was getting into visual effects, doing work for them because they didn't have anybody else could do it. And they were like, oh, you can do it because you did it on your tests. Because when you come from television animation, you learn how to do everything. So when you had a scene, you had to animate the effects and you had to animate the character. So that's what I did for them. And they were like, that's why you got hired. And I was like, well, thanks. So I got that job, and I stayed out. We were in San Francisco for a while. And then all of a sudden, I would say, again, you have these periods in the industry where things change. Right. It went, everything left Facebook and went mobile. So I'd say around 2012, 2013, that's when the whole industry, that's when you start to see the change that we're experiencing now start to come into play, start to happen. And so when things went mobile, all of those games that were on Facebook, because that was a big thing. Like there were so many companies that did that, just kind of just went away. And everybody shifted to mobile. So I was like, well, I'm back at it, back on the street again. So, and by the way, my wife's like, we're going to have a little boy. I was like, oh no. So I got two kids, one in the way, and I have my son. So and then I started, working on my work, and I had to transition into 3D and learn stuff like that. So, but at the same time, I got a job teaching at a college out there, and I was working at this place doing freelance work. Remember those like infographics, like on HR, when you go to HR, you see those infographics. So there was this, the whiteboard stuff. So I did that for a while, and I was teaching, and I was still looking for something full time, and then something came through. And it's not a job that I thought I would take. It was another game company here in Seattle, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this because I was so angry. I'm like, I'm never going to work for a company again. I'm going to get there. I leave in 2 years because they always let people go. Yeah. And so I went, and I was like, my wife, we talked, and my nephew at the time, he had gone through a really good school system in San Francisco. And so I was like, I want to have something on par with them. Yeah. So I went to this job, and they were doing all types of games like match 3, slot games. And so when I was there, they hired me to do character animation. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna do character animation, but I'm not staying here. I'm out, you know what I mean? And so they were like, we changed direction. And then they were like, they got bought out by another company. And I was like, well, that's that. And they were like, and so one of the artists left, and he was like, one of the main motion graphics guys left, and they were like, can you do this for us? And I was just like, I just looked at it. I was like, I've never done motion graphics in my life. So like, I guess I could try. So I sat down and I did, the motion graphics and started getting into effects work. And at the same time, my nephew, he was going to school, constantly getting better and better, smarter and smarter as we go along. And so I looked at that and I made the conscious choice to stay at the company because I wanted to have stability for him.
Yeah.
And then for my son, who is newborn, he's 10 now, but I wanted to have some stability for him. And so by the time I left there, I was like lead animator, principal animator, and I was doing a lot of match 3 games that we were working on and like RPGs that we were working on for them. And I was a head character designer for some of the stuff they were doing. And this is what I mean about to animators is that life will take you places sometimes not because of what you want to do, it's because you have to do it. Okay? And don't discount a place because they don't have a huge name, because the place I was at provided a place for my family. The money I was making from that provided a home for my family, food for them to eat, and a future for my nephew, who wasn't here. So I was there, pandemic hits, and so my nephew is going off to college. And so because I was there and I made the conscious decision, because I had friends who were angry at me, they're like, you need to get back in TV, you need to go back to, film. It's like, I have a good friend, Antoine Cunningham. You need to interview him because he's colorful, he's so funny, he's like, Erik, you're just giving up, what are you doing all this game stuff, blah, 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 you need to get back into it. And I was like, what I need to do right now is make sure I provide a future for this kid. Because my whole thing when I was younger, it was like, I told my wife, I don't want to have any kids, none of this, none of that, because I'm an animator and, it's hard to, I can't provide because you're working from job to job. But God provided for me every step of the way, not for me, but for others. Now my nephew, he just graduated college and he's going to go to med school. So I pick up this kid at the police station because he was stealing for food. Now he's going to be a doctor.
Your grandma got the doctor.
She got it, right? So that's what I told you. So when I say I was blessed, I have been, because there's times in your career you're like, you just don't see any way through the storm. And I wrote this post on LinkedIn to artists that storms come and storms go. You're in the midst of it, you're like, oh man, you can't see your way through it, and you're just like, I don't know what to do. But remember, the storm won't last forever. Things will get better. Our careers are like a pendulum. Things are going to be on high, and things are going to be in the middle. They're okay, and things are going to be bad. But your career is built over a span of time.
Yeah.
Don't worry about, right now I got to be, everybody has to know my name on Instagram.
Yeah.
Maybe your time is to have people know you because your work was solid and that you were reliable, right? So maybe no one's going to know your name, and it's okay, right? If you can, at the end of the day, say you provided for your family and not just, and you don't know who you're going to touch when you go to these jobs, like the people you meet there, because you are, and this is my message to artists, because you are uniquely you, you don't know who you're going to influence and to give them hope and give them inspiration. Again, we go back to saying a kind word to somebody. When you go into the studio and you say to someone, or get on your video chat in the morning, or someone you meet who's not working, and you say, hey, how are you doing? That can mean the world to somebody.
Right.
More than the money and all the fame you get at these companies, okay? So storms come, storms go. Right now we're in the midst of a storm in our industry, but it's going to leave, and it's going to get better. There were times where we didn't have the opportunities we had now in our industries, and you have more opportunity. Now I'm at a company where I'm doing like some sports games, and the owner of the company, they do like sports games like 2K NBA and 2K like NFL and wrestling games, and so I'm there. I'm learning their system, and don't know where my future's headed. I think I do, but
Yeah.
I do want to start my own business. That's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And to tell people, just go find a job with an independent animator. Not everybody can do that.
Right.
You got to meet people where they are and say, I know some people need that, want to work for somebody, and need the healthcare, or they need, or it's not enough money to sustain them and their family. But it will get better.
What are 3 movies or TV shows you recommend to my audience and why?
Well, Beauty and the Beast, for sure, because it's one of the best films ever made. I personally like Superman and Lois. I think it's a great show. I like Superman being Superman and not being evil Superman. And I like the aspect of the family part of it. I think it's a great show to watch. Let's see another movie I would recommend. Glory. I have a poster. I don't know if you see it over here. I have a poster of Glory. When I was a kid, my father was he started in World War II. And so he went all the way to the war, to the first Iraq war. And when I saw that film, it gave me an understanding of what it meant to be a black man fighting for something bigger than himself, or a man in general. Just take black out of it. Just being a man and knowing right to fight for what's right. So Glory, Beauty and the Beast, and Superman and Lois. So they don't the different worlds. I do like the romantic movies, so that's why that era of like, the Disney era where you had the the romantic. I'm a sucker for that. I do love them. So because my wife and I we'll actually watch some of like the old MGM films on PBS sometimes, like His Girl Friday, like the early films like that. That's part of my influence when I in college. I was a film major, so we got introduced to those. But like they have a more of a. I think we're in a society where we're dumbing, I don't say dumbing ourselves down, but sometimes there's some complexities in those films that we don't appreciate, and like we just want to get to the action, we want to get to the the visual, and it's like no, sometimes there's a build up. Like you just don't walk up to a lady and put your arm around it. You're not mine. Ask her out. And if she says no, it's okay. You know what I mean? But you'll see her again, and maybe she might give you an opportunity. Right there you go. So like those films tell stories like that, where it's a little bit more closer to reality, but still have that fantasy. So anyway.
So that's why I prefer like the first 2 seasons of Black Mirror, because that's like British. But then once Americans got interested, I feel like the 3rd season they were like handing us the point on the platter. I'm like, you Americans, like feed people the plot.
Right, exactly, and because everybody's busy now, we're so influenced by social media where we want to see the ending before we see, and that's also hurting our industry. People get off social media so much. Leave it alone, because it's basically it's hurting the film industry, because basically they're putting the best parts of film or TV shows for you to watch, so you don't sit down and invest yourself in the storyline, and that's actually hurting people, hurting people's jobs. So hey, let's temper a little bit of that. There's nothing wrong with advertising a product, but at the same time, putting out a whole clip of a show or a movie that hurts your it hurts the industry, So.
And then when I was watching This Is Us, man, they had me tearing up like almost.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I know.
How there's like the stereotypical way to make people tear up.
Yeah.
You do a nuanced version, like tear up, right?
Right, exactly.
But like what you're saying of people wanting to kind of the action, like they would call some episodes of that like filler episodes. I'm like, no, that was like a pertinent story point.
Exactly.
Future thing. That was no filler episode.
Exactly. And the great shows always makes the little things matter. You never introduce anything to a story that's not going to be that's not going to matter. So sometimes they'll focus on a hat, and you're like, why do you keep focusing on this damn hat? And then it's like, oh, my dad wore that hat, and like, oh no, like it's like, oh man, then you feel like, damn, I feel like crap because I was judging the hat. Now I realize that hat meant something to this person, so now I feel like shit because I'm not a good person. So, and it makes you tear up because you're like, oh, this show is great. so, but yeah, like things like that, I agree with you 100%.
So, what would you say? What do you love about animation?
What I love about animation is I will say this, what I've evolved to learn about it. I love drawing, but I will say this, I've learned to love working with other people to create something that didn't exist before. It's the conversations you have with somebody when you're doing a drawing, you're working on a scene, and you're like, for instance, like when I was coming up, you would take a drawing. So this is a Dan Haskett drawing. I'll show it. I don't know if you can see that, but and you would just put this drawing up, and all day long, you didn't have Google search and 1,000 different places, Instagram to look at stuff. You just had one drawing or a book that you kept open, and that one drawing would inspire you and find its way in the drawings that you're making. And that is what I love about animation is finding the influences from people I work with and looking at their work and the beauty they create and being inspired to put that into my own work. So that collaboration between artists, again, we go back to it from the beginning. Disney was right. You want to work with people, right? And because you're not just working with people, you're being inspired by other people. So when I do animation, I'm not doing animation because I want to be famous. I'm doing animation because I want to be inspired to inspire other people and to educate other people. So that's what I'll say I love about animation. It's the opportunity to be able to do that. It's unlike any other profession.
Yeah, that reminds me of what I was here because I was very quiet to myself, and so I was entertaining myself a lot. And whether it's like the popcorn ceiling or there was my dad had in the kitchen. My dad and my stepmom had a wallpaper that was like flowers, and I just would like find the drawings in the popcorn ceiling or like entertaining myself.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it also, I think that's part of it because I had sisters. I grew up in we would put on these plays and stuff like that when we were kids, and like, particularly like we cleaned up, and grandma would come in like, get that kitchen, so we would make, these little plays or like make fun like we're like characters in a TV show. So I think that's like animation today too. It's like you're talking, like you said, like you're talking to different people and you're pretending, you're still playing like as like a little kid when you're pretending. And to be able to make a living doing that, and it's a great thing, and it's also what matters to me is that as an artist is that I don't work anymore for myself. I've learned to know that I work also for the people I work with. I need to produce so that way my friend, when they go home, that they know they can rely on me, and that they know that, hey, you know what? When they go out with their family and they're trying to provide for them, that I put my best foot forward because so that they could do that. That we all work together so that way we can move in a direction so that we all are creating a product that we can all benefit from, right? The revenue is shared with everyone, right? And so I believe that when you work with artists, it's like, remember, they put on their pants the same way you do. They have pain and hurt and family issues the same way you might have, right? And so we cannot be crabs in a barrel where we're just thinking about ourselves. We want to build each other up so that way we can all, and I know they sound cliche and all this, like, oh, this guy just saying what's right. No, I really believe it. So there you go.
That's that industry experience.
Well, and also knowing that, going through the layoffs and stuff, like the suffering that people go through, You don't want to. If you don't want to suffer, why would you want to see somebody else?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing about what you're saying about cliche. Like that's the thing about tradition. Because I'm in a space. I've been in a space for the past 5 years where, like, as a Black American, just trying to solidify, like, we have a viable culture that we sometimes we don't even actively think about. And other cultures have this privilege of like their culture is kind of associated with a country, and so I'm just trying to like solidify that. But the tradition and the culture, like the cliches, they are cliches because they're true. And so the thing that you did, you experienced life to find out that the cliche is true. So once older people talk and they're like, oh, well, this is what we say because it's true. Like that's what I've learned is the benefit of the tradition and the culture. When you learn from your own culture, people been here before.
Right.
They know what it is already. And to think of youth is to think that you know it all and all that stuff. So sometimes I don't gotta learn the hard way. So like other people do, but if you tell me, I believe you. Shoot, I don't gotta learn the hard way. But some people do have to learn the hard way, and then at the end of your journey, you're like, they was right.
Right. Well, and to be honest with you, I just heard a sermon. I was into church on Sunday, and they were like talking about it's like got a very progressive church here, Black church, and he was talking about that, like. If I could do it, the sermon title was, if I could do it all over again, what would I tell myself? Yeah. And again, these things, you don't think that it matters when you're young and you're like, oh man, I'm out there doing it. But like, as you get older, I'm in this, I'm in a blessed place where I see older artists and I see younger artists, and I'm in the middle, right? And I understand the struggles and the strife of the younger artists, but I also can observe and know what I can face as I become an older artist, right? And the nonsense and the ageism that comes with that. Yeah. Be grateful for the moment, again, like Duncan told me. Be grateful for the moment you are, and remember, you have the arc of a career. Yeah. Everybody right now, yes, things are kind of crazy, but I guarantee you, if you've been blessed with a gift, a God-given gift, you will be doing this 20 years from now. If it's in your heart and you know that that's the gift that you have been given, and you will be okay and you will make a living from it, whether you like it or not. Yeah. You will be okay. The thing is, along the way, is to remember that when you're in the shoes of the people who are ahead of you, or in the shoes of the people behind you, how did you treat them along the way? Because how you treat them reflects on how you were treated or how you wouldn't want to be treated. Right? So treat people well. Because
a lot of people concentrate on communicating with the people above them.
Yeah.
Your peers and the people who are quote unquote below you are people too. And you never know where somebody will be in 5 years.
Right. And also too, when you're talking about culture and finding the culture, you are a part of building that and what you're doing. Okay? So this didn't exist. You are building a platform that can expose regular people right? and what they go through. Or maybe some people who aren't so regular, i.e. Dan. Mufasa. You are building that culture and you are expanding upon it. Yeah. And you got to remember that every step you take forward, everything that you're doing is just putting more and more beauty and solidification so that someone who will see this will feel like they belong. Yeah. Okay? And you already proved that you do because you're doing it, and they are. So, so all the blessings to you.
And that's been my takeaway this year of my journey is like, for my personal culture, Black American culture can be aspirational, and I'm going to be an ancestor. We talk about ancestors.
You will. Well,
you are going to be one by your behavior. Is somebody going to want to do what you did?
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing is, stepping out of the box and doing something that no one else is doing, and to be able to, I never have had this opportunity. I that's why I was telling you earlier. I really appreciate, because like I never thought I'd be here doing this. I never thought I'd be having someone talk to me about my path and the opportunity that you're allowing me to have to maybe speak a kind word to somebody, or even speak to you about my journey is meaningful to me. So I appreciate this, because this is a part of the culture, because this will be shared with other Black people and my children, and they'll see it and say, "Oh, Daddy, I saw what you did on YouTube." That can feel good. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I am grateful. I think this generation, I'll be honest, like we're a generation of people who are transitioning quite a bit. There's so much change, and we're constantly transitioning. There's so much things that we have not properly dealt with. We went through, again, when we came into the industry, the dot-com burst that happened, and the change of technology moving into the space, and moving into animation. So where you started is not where you ended. You're constantly moving into this. Where I'm starting is not where I ended. Then we had the recession. And then we had 9/11. Then we had COVID. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But know this. You're here. You're doing this. It's more meaningful what you're doing than the ignorance and the greed and the carelessness that some people have displayed over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So be proud of yourself, because you're not done.
Right.
And you're doing something that's positive and putting some good out into the world. Okay? So I hope I'm not being too philosophical. I'm just saying, young sister, you keep doing it for yourself. And to be proud of you, and keep, I wish you all the blessings in the world, and success.
Appreciate that.
No doubt.
If someone was producing a documentary about you, what would you want them to highlight outside of your work in animations?
I go back currently right now. I'll finish with this. My sister, now my nephew's in school. My sister had another child in 2008, and we're adopting her. My nephew came to me and said, "Uncle Erik, can you do for her what you did for me?" If someone was doing a film about me, I would hope someone would do a film about not letting children, not looking away, knowing that you could have done something to help somebody else. And if I die, not working for any great studio, or being famous or whatever in art, I'll die knowing that I did some good in this world, and that I left children here knowing that aren't mine, knowing that they were loved because they deserved it. So I am grateful for the opportunities I have, because it's allowed me to provide a future for children to see a better future for themselves, hopefully. And there's nothing, I'm just grateful for that opportunity. So that's all I have to say about that.
So I would like to thank you for
Thank
allowing
you.
me to highlight you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your time again. And sorry, guys, I ramble on. People know me. I get going. But I hope it makes sense. And don't let AI and all this crap scare you. Business is going to business.
Right.
But you have to stay focused and know that you are, as an animator, you're not just an animator, you're a cartoonist. I come back to that. And you can do product design, you can do UX design, you can do all these different things. And you can float back and forth and it's okay. You will be all right. That's what the message I want to let people know, that it's going to be okay. The storm will pass, and there's going to be a bright future for you, no matter what your life, where your life takes you. Just keep being good and kind as you are, and you'll be fine. Okay, so there you go. God bless everybody.
And to everyone out there, I want you to like So I Know It's Real. Come and tell me how you feel. Subscribe to Citadel. Sign up for post notifications for Brazil. And I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you so much.